Shalom uvracha from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. With the help of Hashem, we continue our Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers joint study. And this evening we hope to study chapter 1, Mishna 4, Perek Aleph, Mishna Dalet. This evening we enter a new realm of the transmission of the tradition, where we find two joint partners who together seem to be responsible for the transmission of the tradition from generation to generation. One is identified as the leader of the Sanhedrin, the head of the Sanhedrin, the president of the Sanhedrin, if you may, the Nasi, and one is called the Av Beit Din, the head of the courts. And there's a discussion in the commentaries as to what the difference is between the Nasi and the Av Beit Din. And so for the next several Mishnayot, we will be mentioning two names together, and then each of the two has his particular teaching. Interesting enough, the first of these pairs have the same name. One's name is Yosei, and the other one's name is Yosei. I mean, you could say that happens to be that Yosei ben Yoezer joins together with Yosei ben Yochanan. Is there a certain affinity that a person feels in this world with people who have names that are similar to their own name? Or is that just my imagination? What do you think? What? When I meet someone named Mordechai, I feel like, oh, Mordechai. You know? What?
Salmon.
Yeah, Yossi ben Yoezer, Yossi ben Yochanan. I once walked into the house. The only time in my life, I think I walked into the house of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, blessed memory. That's how. And I walked in with someone who was very, very, very nervous about meeting him. And he was in such awe of this Rav. And how's he going to talk to him? And the first thing he asked, we sat down. He said to my friend, my teacher, he said, "What's your name?" He said, "My name is Shlomo Zalman." I said, "Your name is Shlomo Zalman? My name is Shlomo Zalman." And he broke the ice in 1 second. It was brilliant, the way he did it. So is there a connection between Yosei ben Yoezer and Yosei ben Yochanan in terms of maybe their father's names also start with Yo, right? One is Yosei ben Yoezer and one is Yosei ben Yochanan. Am I imagining this, or is this true what I'm saying?
It's true.
What?
It's true.
There is a connection between people? Yes or no? What? Sure. You think so, really? I'm not sure. Yossi ben Yoez, what? I don't know. I once started making a list of all the times in the Gemara that a rabbi with the same name is elucidating a teaching of a Mishnaic rabbi, Talmudic rabbi, one of the Amoraim. Let's say Rav Yehuda, goes out of his way to explain the position of Rabbi Yehuda. I wondered, I don't know. I once started trying to compile such stuff. Okay. Yossi ben Yoezer ish tzreda.
כתוב שבעל מקצוע, שונא בעל אמונתו אומנותו. So he wants to, it has the same name, so he's like a competition.
Rivalry with each other. Yossi ben Yoezer ish tzreda. Yossi ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim kibbelu mehem. As we mentioned last week, we're talking about the different levels of generation to generation transmission of the oral Torah, of the teachings that God gave Moshe on Sinai, as we've learned in the previous Mishnayot. The next two transmitters are Yosei ben Yoezer, and Yosei ben Yochanan. One lived in Sreida, the teacher of our Mishnah this evening. Yossi ben Yoezer is from Sreida. Ish Sreida is either he was a member of Sreida, he lived in Sreida, or Ish Sreida. He was the man of Sreida. He was the leader of Sreida. Sreida is mentioned in the territory of the tribe of Ephraim, mentioned in the 11th chapter of the book of Kings 1. Yossi ben Yoezer teaches the following teaching that we're about to learn in our Mishnah. The only thing that's interesting to note to me, in terms of the introduction of this Mishnah, is it says Kibbilu Mehem. They received the tradition from them. Those people who followed last week's class, the previous Mishnah, Pirkei Avot Mishnah Gimel, is Antigonos Ish Socho was the teacher. Antigonos Ish Socho Kibel Mishimon Tzaddik. And if they are the students of Antigonos, then it shouldn't say Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan Kibelu Mehem. It should say Kibelu Mimenu. And there are variant readings of the Mishnah that say Kibelu Mimenu. If you want to say Kibelu Kibelu Mehem, maybe they didn't only learn from Antigonos. Maybe they learned from some of the previous teachers as well. In the commentaries on the Mishnah, this question is discussed. Yossi ben Yoezer, Omer, this is his teaching. Yossi ben Yoezer teaches the following teaching. Yihi beitcha beit va'ad lachachamim. Your house should be a meeting place for wise people. Your house should be a meeting place for sages, for scholars, for rabbanim. Yihi beitcha beit va'ad lachachamim. Most people view their home as a place where they live, a place where they dine, maybe a place where they host various guests, but not necessarily in the light of Yossi ben Yoezer, who seems to say that it's a great thing to have chachamim. They're just walking through your house. All the chachamim have to meet somewhere, so where they should let them meet in your house, right? They need a. Why should they have to go to a hotel, room? Let them meet in your house. Why don't you volunteer in your house? And even if you don't understand everything the Chachamim are saying, it's just sitting in your living room. Maybe it's a form of spiritual perfume. The rabbis say that if you walk into a perfume factory, even if you don't touch anything, something is absorbed. Imagine what your house smells like spiritually after the Chachamim. You had like a whole table or tables. Your chachamim, wow, the spiritual aroma that's with you in that home is tremendous. It's a tremendous way of building a house. And that's his teaching. And I believe I saw in one of the commentaries, he says, don't only do it for yourself, but this has a tremendous impact on children. Children are so impressionable. If they see chachamim coming through your home, if they see, rabbis and teachers and rebbitzins and scholars and mashpi'im and mashpi'ot and mechanechim and mechanechot and ba'alei hesed and ba'alot chesed, all of the chachamim, this will have a real impact on your children. It will change their lives. Baruch Hashem, I was brought up in a home where my parents of blessed memory. There were many rabbis that came through our home. Many times we lived in New York. Many rabbis who came from Eretz Israel, they would come through our home. They would sometimes stay in our home, so they eat in our home, and it truly made a mark on my brothers and my sisters, and on me. Beit va'ad lachachamim. I once heard a great rabbi criticizing one of his closest students. And he says, you study every night in the Beit Midrash. You study every night in the Beit Midrash? That sounds like pretty good, right? What's wrong with studying? He says, your children don't see you studying. They see you leaving. Maybe they see you carrying your Gemara or your Chumash or your Mishnayot or your Shulchan Aruch or Rambam. They see you walking out of the house with a book, but they don't actually see their father studying. He says, I think, I'm not sure everybody would agree with it, I think you should study at home. Let your children, at least some of the time, at least once let your children see, let them feel the experience of the house turning into a Beit Va'ad Lachachamim. Bring in your study partner, bring in your Chavruta, and let them feel that experience at home. I was a very, very young child when I started listening to my father teach. He taught a class Friday nights in the house. It was called the Chevra Shas. And in the earlier years when he did it for tens and tens of years, but the earlier years when I was still a very young child, he used to teach in Yiddish. Then later teach. I did not understand one word of Yiddish. nothing, really nothing. And I used to, we had to go upstairs after the meal, because we would disturb it, and I would lie near the steps and just listen to my father sing, chant the Gemara. I still remember it. I still feel it. There's an impression a child feels when something's going on in the house. I once heard Rabbi Menachem Parush, Zichrono Livracha, one of the great leaders of Agudat Yisrael here in Yerushalayim. I once heard him say Al Pi Drush, I don't know if it's his own teaching. It says in the book of Yeshayahu, Ki veiti beit tefillah yikarei l'chol ha'amim. My house will be a house of prayer for all nations. Of course, the simple interpretation is that the Beit HaMikdash, not only the Jews come there for prayer, but everybody come there. He said, Al Pi Drush, Ki veiti, my house. If the whole world would see what's going on in my house, the Jewish people proclaims, they wouldn't think this is a house. They would say this must be a synagogue. This must be a place of worship. Ki veiti, my personal house. L'chol ha'amim yikarei beit tefillah. They would consider this a living room. They would consider this a dining room. Because in a dining room and a living room, in a regular house, you don't have sages coming and studying. You don't have sages speaking. You don't have people sitting and studying. Ki veiti beit tefillah yikarei. There were so many religious ceremonies going on in the house that they would consider it to be a beit tefillah. They wouldn't consider it a private space. So maybe he's encouraging people to turn their house into a place of meeting of chachamim, and it surely has a special bracha. It says in the Torah explicitly that when, let's say, Yosef came to a certain house, so there was a special bracha because Yosef was in that house, right? So maybe every chacham that walks through your house, for whatever reason, however is adding a level of bracha. Second teaching is vehevei mitabek ba'afar ragleihem. And maybe you should sit even at the dust of their feet. The word avak means dust. It means, follow them around. I mean, even if you can't have them in your house. I suppose it was one of the commentators says maybe there are different levels. Maybe the idea would be that the chachamim should come to you. They can't come to you, or maybe when they do even. So mitabek, lower yourself, lower your esteem, and sit even at their feet, and follow them everywhere. Even if you end up being covered with dust by their footsteps. It means that there's a great value in following and humbling oneself before great people. The rabbis teach Gadol Shimusha Shel Torah Yoter Milimudah. Po Elisha ben Shafat Asher Yatzak Mayim Al Yedei Eliyahu. The greatness of Elisha, the greatness of Elisha the prophet was he poured water for on Eliyahu, or in the hands of Eliyahu, for Eliyahu. That's the greatness of Elisha. The greatness of Elisha was the number one student of Eliyahu and Avi. But Shimusha Shel Torah, if you're right there with them all the time. Havei mitabek ba'afar ragleihem. Be there. Get your feet even in the mud. Get your feet even in the dirt. Get your feet even in the dust. To be close to these great, to be great to these close to these great sages. Sit there, even if it means that you get a little dirty, even if it means that you'll have to walk difficult pathways to be with them. Follow them around, and be with them. You'll gain great wisdom just by being close to them. I'm sure if you think about the great rabbis of our generation, the chauffeurs that drove them around, I'm sure let's say Rav Schneerson, Zatzal, say Lubavitcher Rebbe, his private driver, or Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal. I once went to school with someone who used to drive Rav Soloveitchik to the airport, from the airport. He came from Boston to New York. He told me he learned more in those trips than he did in his shiur. He was a student of his, but that's but I believe I saw the name of Chaim Volozhin, a different interpretation. He says mitabek can also mean some level of wrestling, like vayei avek ish imo, behei aveko imo, and he translates. I don't know. It's a novel way of reading this. not just, it's almost the antithesis of the first one. Maybe you have to find the delicate balance between the two. Don't just sit there and just like, you have nothing to say. You're like, a silent, all you're doing is sitting by the feet of the great sages. But maybe, hevei mitabek, maybe you should wrestle with them also. I don't think I would say this teaching. I mean, it's a brazen reading of the Mishnah, right? It's a chidush, yes? I think it's a chidush. Hevei mitabek ba'afar ragla. We find in the Gemara many cases of even close Talmidim at the highest level of derech eretz for the Rebbe. But there was a mitabek. There was a al kain yamar b'sefer milchamot Hashem. There's a milchamta shel Torah, and maybe what he's hinting at in this teaching is maybe a student, of course, should listen carefully and absorb the messages of the teacher. Of course, should follow them and humble himself or herself before the great teacher. But maybe there's also an aspect of self-expression which can be hinted at in this unusual phrase of mitabek ba'afar ragleihem. One always asks, many times in the Gemara, how can it be that the Rav said one teaching and the student said a different teaching? Didn't the student always say the same thing as the teacher? Didn't he always follow his Rebbe's teaching? And it's not necessarily so, right? There's a certain point where maybe the student felt enough wisdom or enough self-confidence to say, of course in a respectful way, in a loving way, in a gentle way, maybe there's another way of looking at the sugya, maybe there's another way of looking at this diyun, maybe there's a different approach. Maybe that's part of this hevei mitabek. Yes, want to say something?
מה אם אומר לך על ימין שמאל ושמאל של ימין, אז חייבים לעשות כמו שהרב אומר, פה אחרת.
זה נכון, אבל יש גם עוד אמרה, יכול עד שיאמרו לך, אפילו אומרים לך ימין שהוא שמאל והשמאל של ימין, תלמוד לומר, לא תעשו מהדברים שיגיד לך ימין ושמאל, עד שיאמרו לך על ימין שהוא ימין, על שמאל שהוא שמאל. So there are different approaches, but I mean, maybe one is halacha lema'aseh. Let's say do this, even if you think differently. We have the case in the Mishna, in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, for instance, right? He humbled himself before the opinion of the great sage. He had an opinion though. He thought whatever date he calculated. You know what I'm talking about in the Mishnah? He humbled himself. He said, I want you to come and show that on Yom Kippur, you will be doing the kinds of things which you wouldn't be doing if this is Yom Kippur according to your calculation. He humbled himself before the great rabbi, but he had an opinion. He didn't just walk around and not say anything. There was this mitabek. Maybe ultimately you have to listen, even according to that. I feel yamin shu small, but you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to. I think you're not supposed to have no opinion on the topic. Is that correct? Does anyone disagree with what I'm saying? What is there another opinion that the student is not supposed to have any say? What do you think?
Maybe only opinion, but when it's come
L'maaseh, maybe. V'hevei mitabek ba'afar ragleihem, and the third and final teaching of the Mishnah is v'hevei shoteh batzama et divreihem, and you should drink their words with great thirst. With thirst. According to the interpretation I quoted before, these are three levels. Have them in your house. You can't have them in your house. If they don't want to come to your house, they're not interested in your house is not appropriate for them to visit, or there isn't enough room there for them to gather and to convene in your house. So follow them. Go with them. So travel following them. And if you can't even do that, you can't have them in your home. You can't follow them around. At least listen to the teachings that they said, and try to absorb the great messages that these rabbis are teaching or taught. When you hear words in the name of the rabbi, so drink them with great thirst, absorb them and carefully incorporate them into your being. In other words, take the waters of Torah. How you call it sameh l'chula mayim ve'ein mayim ela Torah hevei shoteh batzama et divreihem. Absorb their teachings with great enthusiasm, with great passion, with great thirst. I find it fascinating that the Mishnah uses the term shoteh batzama, not just drinking. There's a difference between the way someone drinks and someone drinks when they're very thirsty. And interestingly enough, the halakha is that when one drinks water, because we're talking here in the Mishnah, the phraseology that's used is shoteh. If I may add the word mayim, it doesn't say the word mayim in the Mishnah, but I want to put it in. Havei shoteh batzama et divrehem. You know, when you're drinking water, as opposed to all other beverages, it says in the Gemara that you don't recite a blessing on the water unless you're thirsty. Hashoteh mayim litzma'o mevarech shakol niyeh b'dvaro. If you're drinking water, let's say you're taking water because I don't know, you have to swallow something, you need a little water, so you don't recite a bracha, or many other cases where the water is not necessarily as other beverages, no matter why you're taking them. Once you're consuming a beverage, can we suggest perhaps that havei shoteh batzama divrayim, the great blessing, like the blessing that's recited when a person drinks certain kinds of water when they reach a certain kind of level of thirst, is the way you're supposed to study the words of the great rabbis. The Baal Shem Tov says, and I hope with the help of Hashem we'll get to that Mishnah, in the next several months or years. The Baal Shem Tov says that later on in Pirkei Avot, we have a teaching about halomed yeled versus halomed zaken. The contrast about someone who learns as a young child versus someone who learns already when they're older, when they're an elderly person. And he compares it to Elisha ben Avuya's teaching. He compares one to ink that's written on a clean slate, on a clean piece of paper. That's what Lomed Yeled. And the one who's learning when they're already on in age, on in years, that's also good. They're also writing. But it's like writing on whiteout. You write on whiteout, you can write on whiteout. Or someone takes an eraser and erases something. You can write on it, but it's not the same. Now, almost everybody in the world learns that Mishnah to mean that we're talking about age. Holomed Yeled means someone who started at the age of 5 studying, and Holomed Zakein means someone who began studying at the age of 60. But the Baal Shem Tov seems to learn that it has nothing to do with age. It has to do with the way you learn. Halomed Yeled versus Halomed Zakein. You can be, 20 years old and be Lomed Zakein, and you can be 80 years old and be Lomed Yeled. How can that be? Depends on your attitude towards learning, right? If somebody comes into the class, you could be in 3rd grade, and the teacher could say, okay, we're going to study Parashat Lech Lecha. Parashat Lech Lecha. I studied Parashat Lech. I heard about the 2nd grade we learned Parashat. The 1st grade, my kindergarten teacher told me this. Oh, please, So that's a little maid's okay. And you could be sitting, and you have already mastered great wisdom and Torah. Parashat Lech Lecha. Wow, let's learn Parashat Lech Lecha, right? I'm so excited. Parashat Lech Lecha. Well, every word in Parashat Lech Lecha, it's an attitude towards studying. So one is a Lomed Zakein, and one is a Lomed Yeled. And what's being encouraged is Lomed Yeled. I think that there are different ways of listening to speakers. There are different ways of listening to shiurim. There are different ways of listening to drasha. One could, pass it. Okay, what does he, entertain me? What does this person have to say? Or, oh wow, do you hear what they're saying? The interpretations. These are chachamim. These are the chachamim. Havei shoteh. A person should view it as if they're really so spiritually dehydrated. That, wow, I'm finally going to be able to get hydrated because I'm going to be able to listen to the words of these great people. Maybe learn how to incorporate the great messages of Yossi ben Yoezer from Tzreda, of somehow all of his teaching. All of his teachings seem to emphasize the importance of joining together with the Chachamim, being with them, learning from them, and being excited at the privilege of trying to incorporate their messages. We do hope that every home in the Jewish community, especially here in Eretz Yisrael, throughout the world, should be a Beit Va'ad LaChachamim, that people should be connected to the great Chachamim, and that there should be such a great thirst, as the great prophet writes, at the end of days, there'll be this great this great hunger in the world, this great thirst in the world, not a hunger necessarily for food, not a thirst necessarily for drinks, but because everyone is going to be interested in hearing and absorbing the words of God. May that come true as a result of our teachings and our incorporation. Such a word is incorporation? Such a word? I don't know if there's such a word. As a result of the fact that we will incorporate into our beings and internalize the messages of Yossi ben Yoezer, the whole world will be sensitized to bringing the messages of God with great excitement and with great thirst into their very beings. Thank you so much for listening.